Great. So I'm about to start, so I'll make a bit of an introduction and then we'll start the conversation, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, so hello everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Ricardo Salas, and I have a very special guest tonight. I am in Mexico City, and I'm speaking with a singer-songwriter and also a vinyl collector who has quite a following on Instagram and on a few other social networks. He is Ryan Kickland, but he goes by the name of midnight_Ryan on Instagram. Ryan, how are you doing tonight? Thank you for this moment.
Very well. Good to be here.
Well, thank you. I hope I trust I did the introduction correctly.
Yeah, I think you got it all.
Great,
That about
great.
sums it up.
You're obviously a very good musician. You have quite a few studio records out there. I know through your website that you were first in a band. If I have it here, Animal Kill. But then you
you got it. That's
Animal Kill,
good.
but then you became mostly known for your solo work, and I actually like your music quite a lot. It's very I think Americana is a very like folky Americana is an accurate description, I guess.
Yeah.
Or is acoustic, organic?
Yeah, I do. Mostly studio work. So I kind of go wherever it takes me. And sometimes that's folk music or Americana stuff, and sometimes it's electronic or ambient, or that's one of the benefits of having a home studio is you just kind of follow wherever that creative bug takes you. So that's what I try to do. Great.
Well, I encourage everyone who watches or listens to this interview to go and check out your work. You have some pretty interesting music, both in Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. So that's definitely worth a listen. But I wanted this interview to be about your vinyl collection. You are a record collector. You're obviously very passionate about it by all of the content you share online, and you have a very varied music taste, which was something that caught my attention right away. Actually, I'm very thankful because you have enriched my musical education quite noticeably in the last couple of years that I think I've been following you. So that's great. So first question: how many records do you reckon you have? Do you have a fair idea?
It's tough because I'm always buying collections, so I'm kind of things are always in flux. But somewhere in the neighborhood, in the house of 7,000-8,000 in the house, and then I've got records in storage that I go through, trade, sell, that kind of come in and out of my life,
Right.
And so I'm sitting on thousands more in storage, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60,000 45s in storage. So
okay,
I've got a lot. I've got enough to screw up your back for a long time.
Oh, I could imagine, and they do get heavy. Let me just tell you real quick that I was. This is an interesting interview because I never thought that I would get into vinyl, and I was always very skeptical about the fact of getting into vinyl, especially because some people consider it a fad, but then you see a lot of people who are passionate about vinyl and who have been listening and collecting vinyls for quite a long time. And recently, a friend of mine gave me one of my favorite records. So you know this one. So it's Radiohead's in Rainbows, but he gave it to me on vinyl, and I thus had to buy a turntable. So I think I bought a semi-decent one, but and I haven't been using it that much. It's actually sealed. So I'll have to buy some proper speakers for it. I feel sort of guilty of actually spinning it without a proper sound system. So good. And now that we have that point off, I feel like I might start a small collection. So you're a good inspiration on that point.
But be careful.
Yeah, I can see why it becomes addictive.
You're going to need to reinforce your floors and add a room onto the house before you know it.
Okay, so and I can definitely see why. I can see why it happens. So for everyone who's watching or listening to this, Ryan has a very impressive record room. So you have for what I can tell, a very decent sound system. A surprising I would call it, yeah, a striking sound system. It sounds great even on Instagram, and you've got it very well organized. So it even looks very nice with the guitar that you hang in there at times and so on. So it's a proper, it's a worthy space for a record collector. How long have you actually been having records? So what made you go into that direction? Because obviously you've made a life out of a living out of music, but not everyone is so into vinyl anymore. So what's your story?
I really always have been. My parents were both folk musicians, so I grew up, with just music everywhere, and I grew up with records everywhere, and so all through my life, I've collected music since I was, a teenager. And sometimes it was records, sometimes it was tapes, sometimes it was CDs, and I honestly, I love all of those formats. But vinyl to me has been the one that gets me the most excited. It's just the tactile, the most rewarding format. From a, if you like the fonts and the images and the, just the whole art that goes into a cover design, and the art that goes into the label of the record, and it's just as cool of a visual tactile experience as it is an audio one. So it kind of brings everything together. And turntables are works of art too. They're just incredible machines, and
right.
So it really is the whole package, really, and it's just always been a part of my life. So records have been around my life as long as I can remember. Those album covers are burned into my mind from childhood, and so it was a pretty easy passion for me to pick up.
So even during the the early years of digital audio, you didn't necessarily threw them away, or you didn't pause that passion. You still consumed vinyls during the early days of the iPod and MP3s and so on.
Yeah, I mean there were definitely years that I focused a lot more on CDs, right? I mean, yeah, there was one point. I grew up in South Dakota, so places to get records were limited, and CDs were everywhere. So there were times in my life where, CDs were dominant or tapes were dominant, but vinyl's always been there, and I've always collected. And every time I'd go to a city, I'd find records, and it got to the point where I opened a record store and owned a vinyl shop for a while. With my wife, and so we opened a record store out here in Rapid City, South Dakota, and made it our livelihood too. So it's always been there, and we've always been pretty passionate about records, regardless of what else has come along.
Fantastic. Also, one thing by your music, well, by what I've listened to, you have a very well-trained ear and a lot of sensitivity, if I'm saying this correctly. But what I hear in your music is like there are very subtle dynamics, and you definitely see that you can tell that you've been listening to music for a long time, and that you're very sensitive. You have a very well-trained ear, because the mixing, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but it's quite delicate in a few of your songs, or in most of your songs, I guess. So that really caught my attention. You can listen to the details of the finger picking, the details in the voices, and so that definitely speaks for about someone who's got a well-trained ear, I guess. So maybe that has got to do with all of this musical upbringing, or maybe the sort of music you listened to during your early years, I guess. But brilliant. I found that very interesting. So what about the quality? There's this whole fuzz and this whole discussion about whether hi-fi audio should be digital or it should be vinyl with the proper speakers, proper processing methods, and so on. Is it a subject of quality for you, or is it more about the experience when you listen to vinyl, or what makes you keep collecting vinyls?
Well, I mean, I think there valid arguments to be made for the clarity and the dynamic range of digital formats, and I don't argue with that. And to me, it's how your records sound has so much to do with what you're playing them through. It's vinyl doesn't automatically sound better than a digital format, and then you get into the whole discussion of what's better and how do you define that. So that's why I say I don't collect records in spite of other formats. There's stuff that I prefer to listen to on digital because, for example, classical music that has a lot of quiet, dark, deep, silent passages, some ambient music, things like that. Some metal music that has, really deep, low dynamics. And so it really depends. For me, there's so much more, that you have to take into consideration when you're having that discussion about sound quality and comparing analog to digital. Not to mention, what kind of amp are you running it through? What kind of speakers? What kind of cartridge do you have?
Sure.
What kind of turntable do you have? So, how clean is the record? What pressing is the record? Is it quality is it pressed on quality? But all that stuff. So, to me, I try not to overthink it. I like quality audio gear. I love vintage hi-fi, but I could never be as meticulous as some of the audiophiles out there that can hear the subtleties in the difference between a $500 cable and a $2,000 cable. I'm not to that point, and I kind of hope I never am. But I would say, going back to your question, it really is the whole experience. For me, it really is not only the way it sounds, the way it looks, the tactile experience of it, the art of it, of the album cover and the album design. But it's also, for me, the biggest thing is probably hunting, is I collect mainly old vinyl, right? So I'm always out digging. So I'm looking in thrift stores, garage sales, I'm looking at secondhand stores, antique shops. I buy collections from people. So that to me is what really keeps me passionate, is out there finding stuff you didn't know you were looking for, or finding stuff you were looking for. And that's exciting too. So for me, there's that whole aspect of hunting for records that is a huge appeal to me.
So it's part of the game, isn't it? So I see, because it's not so much the objective, whereas more the sort of the path or the chase, the hunt for the records. Yeah. So it doesn't bother you that much if you buy a vintage record and if it's a bit run down. So that wouldn't bother you as much if you can still listen to it and keep it spinning. That's I
am pretty picky about the condition. After you've collected records for a while and played records for years, you have a pretty good, quick sense of what's going to be a record that's too rough for you to enjoy, right? So you build a pretty quick sense about that. But I'm not so nostalgic that I want a record that pops and skips all the way through it. I still want a clean play. So that is what I look for when I'm out hunting. But it is for me, it's like anybody that collects anything. When you're out there and you're looking in the wild and you find something you didn't expect, or you find something that takes you just on a completely different path musically because you stumbled across it and took a chance on it. To me, that's the heart and soul of record collecting.
Oh, absolutely. And I can imagine that you found some real jewels during these trips and hunts, because you also do travel quite frequently because of your music, right?
Yeah, and I travel across the country and buy collections a few times a year, and just dig for records everywhere that I go, and and absolutely. I mean, I've one record, one obscure find that I rolled the dice on, or just picked out of a bin somewhere, could send me down months of research into a genre or research into an artist or band.
Sure.
Or as a musician, can inspire me with ideas that were dormant, before I heard it. So it's an exciting process.
I can imagine. Could you pick, if we could talk about a few artists or maybe a few records that you really enjoy? It's the typical desert island question. If you were on a desert island, which would be your, say, top 3 or top 5 records that you wouldn't live without?
That's for someone.
Is it too tough of a question, maybe?
Yeah,
or, I don't know. It could be challenging, right?
I've never been able to answer that question effectively, because for me, I have favorite albums,
right?
Albums that I go back to more frequently than others, but I am always ingesting new music. I'm always, part of what keeps me going is digging deeper and further and finding, music. And I love soul music. I love jazz. I love funk. I love prog rock. I love, old 50s country music. I love classical music. There's so much music that's so important to me. I can't imagine narrowing it down to a top 3 or a top 5. I'll tell you that the 18-year-old me would have told you that it would have been, every early album by Pink Floyd. I was a Pink Floyd fanatic, I think, for about 4 or 5 years. That's about all I listened to, my late teens to early 20s. And
yeah, you wouldn't be alone though.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in that boat. But these days, it's I'd regret my answer right after I gave it to you, because I think of a dozen more that need to be on that list.
Totally.
I would, if I ever were on a desert island, I would probably want to pick something really special from each genre that I love, and that's about as close as I can get to an answer.
Okay, but that's fair enough, though. But you did mention that you had some favorite bands or favorite records. So say that someone like me or someone who's listening to this conversation wants to go into vinyl. Which albums or which few albums would you recommend that are truly worth having on vinyl?
What I always recommend is, if you're just getting into records or record collecting, what I'd start with something that you already are familiar with, and I've played people, Neil Young on vinyl, and they've been listening to Neil Young their whole life on digital, and it's just a different experience. And that some people are more keen to that difference than others, and some people feel that experience more than others. But that, to me, is a good kind of litmus test of how much you're going to appreciate the medium,
Okay.
Because if you can experience music that you're already familiar with in a different format, and it does something to you, and it gets a hold of you, and that sound washes over you. You hear it in a different way. You experience listening to it in a different way, but it's something you're familiar with. It kind of gives you a frame of reference, right? And so beyond that, I would say that if you're just starting, it's kind of challenging now. It's a different world now than it was 15 years ago. Because 15 years ago, new bands weren't releasing their stuff on vinyl, right?
Absolutely.
There wasn't this resurgence of vinyl. So, and that's where a lot of guys and girls like me who are out, digging for records, that's where they come from. Is they come from a place where we couldn't go down and buy the band you like on vinyl, you know, so you're just out there digging for anything that looked interesting, digging for anything that you know, got your attention. And so I'd say if you're just getting started, find some classic albums that you've already become familiar with through digital formats, and see what that experience is like when you listen to them on vinyl, and that'll probably make you a believer pretty quick or not.
That's a very good consideration, because if I can speak from my own experience, I have a very good friend of mine who's a bit of an audiophile, and he likes Radiohead just as much as I do. But I don't know if we appreciate the band in a different way, but each to his own. And we decided to do an A and B test. He bought this, I believe it was Amnesiac, and it was Amnesiac. So we did the test with a very high quality digital audio. I believe it was like hi-fi Tidal, and so we compared Tidal with a brand new vinyl on the very same sound system, and our conclusion was actually rather interesting, because we discussed it for a few moments. We listened to the same songs, we A and B'd the whole thing, and our conclusion was that the digital version was just more accurate, it was quite precise, and it would let you listen to all the nuances, all the differences, and the tiny, the different layers and different instruments in the tracks. But the vinyl to us was just, and I guess this is redundant, but it was a bit warmer in a sense, and it sort of made us feel like the band was playing for us inside the speakers, like they were trapped inside there and they were doing a live show in a sense. It was not as accurate, but it was just a different experience. And that's as accurately as I can ever express my experience with this new, resurgent format.
I think and I don't think you should overanalyze it. I think it really should be, listen, you know, if it moves you, if it does something for you, then it's probably worth pursuing. And if not, then at least you tried.
Great. That's a great response. Thanks so much for that, Ryan. You've been posting some really interesting records lately, but like you said, the genres are so varied, and you have such a broad musical taste that I couldn't really pin it down and reduce it to a few genres. So I would truly encourage people to follow you, mostly on Instagram. So your account is midnight_Ryan, correctly?
And it's spelled MIDNITE _Ryan.
Right, like a brief, like a short version for night, midnight_Ryan. So there, true encouragement for people to go and check your site out, and also your music. Speaking of which, I did some research while I was doing my master's on music and politics. More than politics, it was political engagement. And I'm not going to go into politics or anything of that sort. But what I found surprising through that, because I was raised listening to a lot of music, and music definitely changed the way I perceive the world. So I was just curious to know whether, all of this musical education that you had, your upbringing, being close to music all the time, listening to so many different records. Do you think that had an impact on the way you perceived the world yourself, and maybe I don't know, art? Did music form a critical part of your education or your perception as a human?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think anybody who dives into any art form at the level that people consume music, if you are an extremely devout consumer of literature or visual art, or if you're an artist yourself, I think the whole one of the most important things about any art form is being confronted with ideas or feelings that you may not be familiar with, or that resonate with you on a very deep level. And so I don't know how you can spend, particularly if you're listening to music across different genres, right, and you're really trying to branch out. I don't know how you can spend any any decent amount of time listening to a broad variety of music without it having an impact on your world outlook. And I think, you know, not to discount any other art forms, but I think because music is such a, you know, socially connected art form that combines the emotion of instruments and musicianship and composition with a message, is lyrical music. It just kind of hits you on all fronts. And so absolutely, it, you know, all those artists that I listen to, all that music that I listen to, I would feel like a failure if it hadn't had a profound impact on my worldview.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that, and I'm on the same boat on that one. Could you think of an album or a song that rocked your world at any given point? I mean, I guess there must have been a lot of albums that you know, that really caught your attention during your lifetime. But can you think of one or a few which were particularly special for you, or that you have close to your heart?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the, you know, a good example of what I was talking about earlier, where one album can kind of unlock a whole direction, musical direction, was an album by a band called Soft Machine.
Oh, right. Prog rock.
Yeah. And the album is Third. And I found that album as a teenager. And like I told you before, I was really into Pink Floyd at the time, and what I recalled when I saw that album was, I remember seeing old concert posters of Pink Floyd's where the Soft Machine was a double bill with them. So I thought, well, if this band was out there playing with Floyd, they're probably pretty cool. And I got Third, and it was just mind blowing to me. You know, a completely unique, even in the realm of British prog rock. I mean, a very unique album, kind of a mix of free jazz, pop, and prog rock, and just really unique musicianship. Robert Wyatt, who is their drummer and vocalist, is one of my favorite artists, and so his imprint on that album was obviously really prevalent, and that got me into this whole subgenre of prog rock, of Canterbury prog music, which just opened door after door after door into different bands and different sounds, and so that would be one that comes to mind as just kind of one of those domino effect records that, as soon as I heard it, it was, you know, I was down a rabbit hole, and I can't imagine how many albums I discovered as a result of kind of unlocking that one door.
Brilliant. And I truly like that term, that sort of domino effect that one album can have during your lifetime or your musical education. Are there any particular artists whose music you're excited about these days, or any albums that you'd be willing to like go out and buy on vinyl particularly, or anything that moves you recently?
There, you know, I'm admittedly a pretty big failure when it comes to staying current. You know, there are I try to, you know, if I find something that's new, which, because I'm always out digging in old records.
Sure, yeah, I can see.
And when I'm not doing that, I'm writing or recording my music, and I am, you know, I fault myself here for not making the time to stay more current, right? You know, I try to, you know, one of the most recent albums I bought of a, you know, current relevant artist, St. Vincent, who I like a lot and I think is quite interesting, but I'm constantly trying to do better there, and be open and actually take the time to explore current music, because that is not my strong suit.
Oh, well, I think I'm totally on the same boat as well on that one, because there's also this effect that when you start to discover older music or music that was quite influential in past decades, you also started to discover artists of that time who were interesting, and you start developing a bit of a sensitivity, and you started discovering new genres that were rocking the world in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it's such a broad world, and now we've got Wikipedia, and you can dig in and know so much about so many things that sometimes it's already a full-time job to do that, and it's a whole different thing to stay current. So I at least have a very hard time. I prefer to say, okay, I have a good understanding of what popular music that was a few decades ago, and that gives me a good judgment to assess whether current music is good or bad, or that it will at least give me a decent historical reference in terms of. So sometimes you just you get so entrenched in that you end up not discovering new music. But I don't know. I guess it's a thing that people who are passionate for these things share.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but great. Well, I don't want to keep this conversation too long, so I can only thank you quite sincerely for the time, Ryan. I think your collection's fantastic, but also all of these brilliant music genres and albums that you share with us all. So much appreciated. Thank you for the time. I don't know if you would like to pinpoint any parts of the conversation or say have a final word.
No, I appreciate your time. It's good to chat with you. Instagram is I am not adept at or motivated to be very present on social media, with that one exception of Instagram. And I originally started that Instagram page just because I like records. I like old stereo equipment, and I know other people also have similar passions, and I really just wanted to learn as much as I wanted to share. And it's a great way to connect. And I've learned there's tons of music I've discovered through other people on Instagram, and I've learned about vintage equipment. I've learned about stuff in the audiophile and hi-fi world. So it's been beneficial and a lot of fun. And so I try not to take it too seriously. Try to always have fun with it. And if it's not fun, take a break, do something else. But for me, it's just a good time, and I'll keep doing it as long as it's a good time.
Absolutely. Well, that's a very good a very good answer. Last but not least, one challenging question and one, I guess, rather easy question. The challenging one, I didn't want to end the conversation without asking you, which in your opinion is Led Zeppelin's best record? I promised a friend that we would have this debate, and I say Led Zeppelin 3. He goes to the 4th, but
their best.
I'd like your opinion.
Well, what I would consider their best achievement as an album, as the whole of an album, would be Houses of the Holy.
Okay, interesting.
I believe that one, to me, functions as one piece. So when you're saying album, that to me is arranged in a way that the songs are, it's very grand. It evokes kind of a consistent arc of a mood. That doesn't mean it's the one I listen to the most, right? But that would be, in my opinion, their biggest album achievement. The one I listen to the most, though, is probably either 1 or 3.
Okay, because see, I'm a very, very big fan of Led Zeppelin 3. I'm a big adept of that, and I was having this conversation with someone, so I had to make sure that I asked you the same question, because I know you like them a lot. And finally, the easy question is vinyl here to stay, or did vinyl research to stay?
As long as there are people that, I think it's been turned on to such a huge amount of people over the last 10 years, new vinyl listeners, that I can't imagine it. I mean, it's never gone away for some of us, right? It's always been in our lives. It's always been there. But in terms of commercially, I think it's got a pretty long shelf life. Who knows? 30 years from now, I don't know. We're maybe listening to music through our eyes. I don't know.
That might as well be. Yeah.
Yeah. So
possible.
But I think for the short term, I don't see it dwindling commercially anytime soon. I think it's just too damn cool, and there's too many people into it.
Oh, there's certainly a lot of pleasure to be drawn out of these things. So I have a bit of Stevie Wonder that I can listen to here as well. So so you definitely got me hooked into this, and it's brilliant. Well, congratulations for your work, Ryan, and once again, thank you so much for the time. I think that covers pretty much all of the questions I had. But I'm very sure that a lot of people will find this conversation interesting. So let's keep posted. I'd love to keep seeing your posts, seeing your accommodations, and I'm pretty sure that you still have a lot more music to share.
Always, you bet. Good to meet you. Thank you for the time.
Well, thank you for the time as well, and I hope it's not too cold over there in South Dakota.
Yeah, we'll survive.
Great. Well, all the best.